Good evening and welcome to Malard at Large. My guest tonight is Salome Zourabichvili, President of the Republic of Georgia. Right now, her TV profile by Elaine Corby.
A former French diplomat at the helm of Georgia. This is the unusual story of Salome Zourabichvili. Born in Paris in 1952, she comes from a family of Georgian immigrants. Highly influential in the Georgian diaspora, the Zourabichvili family includes among its ranks intellectuals, economists, and politicians. It was the latter sphere that caught Salome Zourabichvili's attention. In 1972, she graduated from Sciences Po Paris. Her studies in the international department opened wide the door to diplomacy. The Frenchwoman held a series of positions in various embassies, and it was during her term as first secretary at the French embassy in Washington that she visited Georgia for the first time in 1986. In the early 90s, Salome Zourabichvili was posted to Brussels to represent France at NATO and then at the Western European Union. In 1996, she joined the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, where she held various positions before joining the Prime Minister's office in 2001 to head international affairs. The year 2003 marked a turning point in the life of the diplomat. Georgia was undergoing a period of political turmoil with what was dubbed the Rose Revolution. President Jacques Chirac then appointed Zourabichvili ambassador of France to Tbilisi, a position she would occupy for a year before being appointed Minister of Foreign Affairs of Georgia this time. But relations with the then president deteriorated and she was dismissed 2 years later. She then became an opposition member of parliament before leaving Georgia for a few years to work for the UN. 2015 was her comeback year. After being elected to parliament once again, she reluctantly gave up her French nationality to enter the Georgian presidential race, an election she won in 2018, becoming Georgia's first female president. Since then, Salome Zourabichvili has been working to bring her country closer to the West, in particular the European Union and NATO.
Mrs. President, the conflict between Russia and Ukraine has been already lasting for 16 months. Mrs. President, how do you foresee the future? Can there be any peace agreement when we see the die-hard positions of Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky, who refuse to make any territorial concessions?
Well, I don't understand your question, really. I don't see why Zelensky should make territorial concessions regarding his own territory. On the other hand, Russia, who has started a war on his own command, an aggression that they thought they would win within a few days, completely crushing the Ukrainian government. And they said so. They said, we're going to denazify, we're going to reduce it to nothing. They're losing this war, obviously, on different levels. So no territorial concessions. Rather, you should try to stop trying to occupy your neighbor's territory. It concerns the Ukrainians and it concerns us as well.
Do you consider that Vladimir Putin has already lost his war, which he expected to be a blitzkrieg?
Yes, he's had different strategies. The first one was Kiev in 5 days, then the government is going to go abroad. After that, the bombing of the civil population to try to demoralize the civil population. I always say that this is a KGB war, not a military war. He did not allow the military command to choose the strategy. In fact, he has changed the military command very often without having better results. And at the end of the day, he's had to choose as a commander, a gangster that has other gangsters at his service, Prigozhin. So this war has not attained the political or military objectives. On the other hand, the rest of the world, Zelensky, first of all, who has made a fantastic campaign that allowed him to mobilize a support that nobody thought possible. Financial support, military support. The European and Western world is not divided. Sweden and Finland are joining NATO. NATO is more vigorous. Failure after failure for Russia and Putin. Nobody knows how it will end for Putin inside Russia, but the war has already ended for him.
Vladimir Putin just delivered recently nuclear arms to Belarus at NATO's frontiers. For you, is it a maneuver to intimidate the Western neighborhood, or can he use the nuclear arms?
Well, I think it's very difficult to say with nuclear weapons, you know it yourself. But he continues to wage psychological war. He's still the KGB agent that is trying to intimidate psychologically. So it's a psychological weapon. You should never say never with nuclear weapons. You have to be cautious. But the fact that he has delivered them to Belarus, with all this environment and the announcement, when you want to use nuclear weapons, there's no need to make previous announcements. So it's rather psychological.
According to the Hungarian Minister of Foreign Affairs, the possible use of nuclear arms could lead to the end of the world.
No, because if the Russians try to use nuclear weapons, tactical nuclear weapons, which is what they have delivered, well, I don't want to tell you what would be left of Russia after the American response, because there would be an American response. So Vladimir is playing with a fire that he does not control. He is unable to control the military war, and in the same way is not in control of the nuclear war. He is not in a position of superiority, so he better not try.
According to you, Mrs. President, is Vladimir Putin always obsessed with the idea of rebuilding the former Soviet empire?
Well, he'd be better obsessed by the idea of resisting to himself, because he is in a very bad shape. The former Soviet empire does not exist anymore. It will never exist again. Bordering countries. What I said before, I think this war will end with a peace negotiation in which Russia will have to give up the territory it has occupied, and it will have to recognize once and for all that there are, for Russia and for any other country on the planet, borders that must be respected. Russia has never understood, and no Russian knows how to draw with a pencil the borders of his own country like we do. You can ask a Russian and you'll see.
Is Putin able to draw the lessons for what seems to be the failure of his strategy?
I don't think so. Russian militaries will probably be the first to draw lessons, because this great army that since the Second World War looked as an invincible army, perhaps not respected, but at least feared. Now it looks in our world as an army with no shoes, no food, replaced by Prigozhin and his like. I imagine this army is completely humiliated. It is not anymore an instrument for the support of his political power. In the same way, the oligarch elites that he had around him are beginning to consider that all of this is not really in their favor. Their children cannot enjoy their London or Monaco villas anymore. So here again, there's also pressure. The only thing left is the circle of what we call the instruments of force. KGB, the police, the, so to speak, special forces. Is that enough to govern? And then, well, there is no opposition in Russia that will take to the streets because it is not in their genes. In Russia, either it explodes, and then nobody knows what will happen, or people find it difficult to organize themselves to take to the streets. There's no real opposition at the moment, at least, but it's clear there's dissatisfaction.
We have a break now, and we will be back in a few minutes on i24NEWS. We are back with our guest, Salome Zourabichvili, President of the Republic of Georgia. Recently, Ukrainian drones targeted for the first time the Russian territory. Do you consider it as an expansion of the war, a military turn in this conflict between the two countries?
Well, I'm not sure that they have recognized that it was them. And I don't think that there are new dimensions. The dimension is clearly that the Russians have not been able to take Bakhmut. They were unable to move forward. Ukrainians are trying to build the necessary capacity for a counter-offensive. I don't know, it will start now within 1 or 2 months. And they will not stop. The announcements on territory and Russian territory are what they are, but they will not stop before they have conquered back their territory, including Crimea.
I know that for years and years you have been fighting hard for having Georgia inside Europe. Aren't you afraid that amidst this chaotic situation, it might be a wishful thinking like Ukraine in NATO?
All of this wishful thinking that we thought impossible is becoming a reality, one after another. When I arrived in Georgia after my French hat, everybody told me, before I left as an ambassador and then as a minister, the neighboring policy for Georgia is, don't even think about it. 6 months after that it was there, then it was the association agreement, it's not for Georgia. And then once we had the association agreement, all the high officials in the European Union said, well, do not make a mistake, this is not an opening towards the final accession. But for Georgia, where there is a geographical question, this was the question that was on the table as one of the arguments, saying, well, Georgia is geographically not European. But there's a perspective, and the perspective is, yes, you are potentially European. After that, of course, you have to do the work, to walk the path. The importance of the perspective is that the geographical discussion, geography versus identity, has ended. The geography is not an obstacle anymore. That you cannot change. Everything else can be changed. So from now on, the geography is not an obstacle. The rest is to be done by Georgians to comply with all the conditions that are submitted to everybody else. I'm quite optimistic regarding the end of the year on the candidate status. The population is in favor of it and showing it. I think the authorities will have to make a number of things as well. And I'm optimistic because a negative decision regarding Georgia, I think everybody understands, would be very serious, because it would give Russia the possibility to win a point that they cannot win otherwise. It would not be a military point, but they could say, well, this is a grey area, it is of no interest to Europe. I can have fun in this backyard. And I think nobody wants to give satisfaction to Russia, nor to allow them to begin to play there. In the Caucasian region, where Europe is back, it is very present. It is the European Union with the United States who negotiate with Azerbaijan and Armenia. The Russians have left. They do call them to go to Moscow to negotiate, but the real negotiations happen in Brussels. That is where they're moving forward. Europe has a surveillance mission of the Georgian line. They have a second mission in Armenia as well. If someone has said 20 years ago that there would be European military forces, even if they're not on a military function, that there would be European military forces in Armenia or Georgia, people would have said you're absolutely crazy. Well, we are not crazy.
It's my opinion, but I could be wrong. Would you say that there is an hypocritical game played by the United States, which declared a proxy war to Putin through Ukrainians and Europeans?
No. Words are very important. Russia has declared the war. They are the aggressors. Nobody else has declared a war on Russia or has provoked Russia. It is Russia alone who started with these little green men trying to nibble on Ukrainian territory. And Zelensky played it really well. He has done so before and now. He did not make a move in order to leave the entire responsibility of declaring the war or the aggression to Vladimir Putin, so that there would be absolutely no doubt. When Vladimir Putin launched the attack, it was clear to everybody that there was absolutely no question who started. It was Vladimir Putin. Only him. It was very clear for Zelensky himself that the Americans or the Europeans would not go to war directly instead of him. He knew that very well. But he has obtained from the European and the United States something that nobody thought would be obtained for a country at war with Russia.
Is Joe Biden's purpose to eliminate Vladimir Putin before the next U.S. presidential election of November 2024?
Even if he had that in mind, I'm not sure that Joe Biden can decide how to bring down Vladimir Putin or not. This is an internal matter. Nobody can answer the question at what point the military failure that he is suffering from in Ukraine may have consequences for the regime. I personally think that it would be better for Putin to go all the way in his war and losing the war all the way, because if he was replaced in the middle, we would probably see a number of countries who could begin to say, well, this is someone else, perhaps we can start talking, these persons are not directly responsible for the war. You know, everything that we're all acquainted with in terms of avoiding to continue supporting Zelensky till he recovers Crimea. So I think we should leave things as they are, and I don't think, once again, that Biden is in a position to decide when he wants Putin to go away.
Might the NATO be strengthening at its frontiers with Finland and soon with Sweden lead to more exasperations on Putin's side? Of course, if Turkey is not opposing the getting in of Sweden.
But who cares, really? Why are we always concerned by the reaction he will have, by his humiliation or his entourage or his fears? He started a war. He has to suffer the consequences, and one of those consequences is the enlargement of NATO. If he didn't want NATO to be enlarged, you know, NATO in the last few years were becoming quite calm, you know. It is only the aggression of Russia that provoked the revival, so to speak, of NATO, which provoked other countries to want to request NATO's protection, because everybody sees that only when you have the American umbrella, you are really protected. Why do Ukraine and Georgia want to join NATO? It's because they can see that the Baltic states and Poland benefit from the peace of security, which is different from Ukraine and Georgia. So, if Putin does not want the enlargement of NATO, he should withdraw from the occupied territories in Ukraine and Georgia. He should recognize totally territorial sovereignty, and he should begin a new neighboring policy, a different one, in which he would treat neighbors on an equal footing that we respect. It's very easy.
On May 7th, 2005, 18 years ago, which doesn't make me younger, I was granted an interview by Vladimir Putin in which he said, quote, "Don't touch Ukraine and low enlargement of NATO." Should we have listened to him?
But what would have changed? He has attacked. So we have to think and acknowledge his obsessions and leave to him all the countries that he's obsessed with. If he says, don't touch France, we should not defend France, because he said, don't touch France. These are sovereign, independent countries. We are, I think, in a crucial moment where we have to choose. Either Russia recognizes, accepts to become a normal state, a very large state, It controls a sixth of the world land. You just have to look at a map to see that. Either he becomes in his space a normal state, and then we can have normal relations, or it is incapable of doing away with this sort of internally relentless imperialism, which has been a feature of Russia up until now.
Finally, can we have reliable, suitable conversations with people who might be substitute for Putin? I think of the Minister of Defense, Shoigu, or the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Lavrov. They are all the same bunch.
I don't know at all who will be there tomorrow. It's very difficult to see today what is happening within this elite or non-elite in Russia. As I said, you can have anything. You can have a military uprising against Putin because it made Russia lose face in the world, or you may have, and that has happened in the history of Russia a number of times, eruptions of the population. These are eruptions where nobody knows exactly what is happening and how will it end. So predictions are very difficult, and they're good for nothing, because actually it is not an analysis that you can make and from which you can draw conclusions regarding the behavior that we should have. What we should do is try to make Russia understand that it cannot continue with its aggressions against its neighbors.
Do you fear, Mrs. President, a Sino-Russia-Iranian axis facing a US-European-Israel axis and a new world order? I would like to hear from you on that, shaped by Russia and China.
Forget Russia. You know, the Chinese came, they met with Putin, they spoke to him, they went back crashed. It is not Russia that can become a partner of China. I'm not even sure that China is looking for a partner. I'm not a specialist in China, but my impression is that China does not feel the need to look for alliances, partners perhaps, but alliances of this sort. I don't think that the next world order will be a world order with axes and such alliances. This is what we're used to. I think we're going towards something new.
When you see the way things go in this world, what is the message you feel to convey to the rest of the world about the ongoing developments and this situation? You are a wise person, and you probably can answer that.
Well, the message is the following. The normal world that will emerge after this terrible war, this is a war in which Ukrainians are the ones who are suffering, not most, but all of the consequences. It's up to them to determine how it will end. But the world that will emerge, if we want it to be more stable, more acceptable, normal, Russia must become a normal state, and then Europe will have gained a partner. But only if Russia stops being what it has been up until now and becomes a new Russia. Otherwise, Russia itself will not be able to resurrect. It will not have economic or moral strength